Good evening and welcome to this latest edition of Elephant in the Room. And once again, it's my honor to be joined by my friend, Ms. Atsango Chesoni, who we've spoken to before. Atsango is a constitutional lawyer. She's a former executive director of the Kenya Human Rights Commission, and she's a former member of the committee of experts that did the final drafting around the 2010 constitution, which has been the subject of considerable debate over the last few weeks, especially ever since the judgment by the High Court that declared the Building Bridges initiative unconstitutional. Karibu Atsango.
Thank you for inviting me. It's lovely to be on the Elephant in the Room again.
Asante. Atsango, I don't want to focus on the legalese of the BBI judgment. But I wanted you to basically, as a constitutional lawyer, but as a Kenyan and somebody who's been involved in civic life in this society for some time, to give us your take, your reading of what would appear to be an apparent tension between the executive and the judiciary, and what its impact is on governance. There are those who would argue, said, well, we've been talking about promulgation of the Constitution for 10 years now, 11. We promulgated the Constitution in 2010. And this is what constitutionalism looks like, that there'll be a continuous testing of the Constitution and its place, in place of the judiciary vis-a-vis the executive and the legislature. I just wanted to get your reflections on that. The newspapers are full of discussions around the BBI initiative, the executive pushing back, Parliament seemingly taking a backseat. So I wanted to get your take on the whole situation and what its implications are.
You have to look at this within the context of our political culture, our historical political culture, as well as our historical culture of constitutionalism. And also within the context of how this particular constitution evolved.
Okay.
And, I have to say one of the things I love about this decision is that it has been recorded somewhere officially, the process by which the Constitution evolved. It's now a matter of jurisprudence.
Yes.
That for me it's great.
Okay.
It's not something I would have expected.
Yes.
It's great. And sometimes when we go through, over the past few years, I've reflected a lot on some of the things that I thought would change about how we conducted civic affairs in this country.
Yes.
And some of the things happened. And one of the things that it's made me reflect, and maybe I need to read a little more around that, I just sometimes wonder if I had lived in any of the countries which have what I consider to be fairly robust democracies.
Yes.
If I had lived in those countries at the time that the principles on which those democracies are founded were coming into play, would I have seen the same kind of dynamics that we're seeing? Mm-hmm. And remember that globally, we're living in a time when one of what we have historically considered to be a fairly sound democratic system is actually being tested.
Yes.
In the United States.
Yes.
We are watching the contestation between attempts to introduce what I consider to be a form of despotism.
Yes.
And what seems to be a country that seems to have institutionalized several democratic norms.
Yes.
Over time.
Yes.
So the lesson from that is, for me, is that no matter how young or old your constitution is, and no matter how young or old your democracy is,
yes,
actually democracy to me today, I would say, is actually fairly fragile.
Okay.
That's what that's the lesson I've taken.
Yes.
And it's because it's not just the US where you see this.
Yes.
There are many countries. I'll just look at a country in Africa, Mali.
Yeah.
I remember 20 years ago, I was very close friends with the late Tajuddin Abdul Rahim.
Yes.
Who was Secretary General of the Pan-African Movement and who, passed away in Kenya.
Correct.
I had met Taju when I was still a student, and he probably was the person who knew me best in my adulthood. Yes. Because as an adult,
yes,
we by coincidence ended up in the same places.
Okay.
And we had a friendship that had developed, and we were very close. He was like an older brother to me.
Yes.
And he was very well schooled in various African countries and their history. And I remember about 15 years ago, him pointing to Mali as like a beacon.
Yes. One
of the beacons on this continent of evolving democracy.
Yes.
I think if Taju, God rest his soul in peace, was to come back today, he'd be horrified because the kind of conversations we had about 15 to 20 years ago, if anyone had told us that Mali would be the place where you'd be having coup upon coup and some junta, imposing itself, I would have been like, no.
Okay.
And so I think that cliche about the price of freedom being vigilance.
Yes.
I think we're experiencing it in many ways across the globe today.
Yes.
And so I see what's happening over here.
Yes.
And in our context, I am learning to begin to see it as part of the ebb and tide. Of course, with a new and young democracy such as ours.
Yes.
You can expect, I think, the contestation to be even more vigorous.
Yes.
And really, we need to understand that if we don't defend those principles strongly, then, it could be make or break. It is possible for a country to swirl in oppression for centuries.
Yes.
I mean, when you look at Haiti, which was the first Black, republic in the post-colonial, post-slavery period.
Yes.
We all know what has happened there, and that there's been a continuous reassertion of despotism.
Yes.
Yeah, so it is possible for centuries for despotism to reassert itself.
Yes.
If we as a people don't guard our freedoms jealously. And I think that's the lesson. The other thing is that when we were working on the Constitution, one of the things I remember us having a conversation about in the committee of experts,
yes,
from some of the experts, was about how new institutions, because this Constitution set up several new institutions, it brought back the Senate.
Correct.
The Senate had been there at independence, but was very quickly proscribed.
Yes.
It introduced a kind of like quasi fourth arm of the state through constitutional commissions.
Yes.
Older, more established institutions like the National Assembly, like the executive, will always resist the new institutions.
Yes.
And that is part of that's normative.
Yes.
Whereas the judiciary isn't new. It was pulverized fairly early.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I don't think it was ever allowed to really blossom and grow.
Yes.
And so, in a way, when you look at the traditional three arms of the state, let's put aside the constitutional commissions because they're completely new for us in Kenya. If you look at the traditional three arms of the state,
yes, then
I'd say the judiciary is the baby.
Yeah.
And so there's this resentment, I think, from the others about the judiciary asserting itself. And that's the context in which I see those contestations. And then the judiciary is charged with protecting the Constitution.
Yes.
And that again is normative in constitutional democracies. And so for those who resent this constitution, and make no mistake about it, this constitution was imposed on the politicians.
Yes.
We've had this conversation before.
Yes.
Kenya's constitution making history is unusual because we have a situation where the people
Yes.
drafted their constitution.
Yes.
Usually it's the elite.
Mm.
And of course, especially the political elite.
Yes.
So for me, the BBI contestation, and this was my perception of it even before the ruling came out.
Yes.
Was that it was an attempt by the political elite. BBI is an attempt by the political elite to claw back the control.
Yes.
Constitution making in Kenya.
Yeah. I that's very well put, Atsango. The question I would follow up with is and I can see you've put it very well that the judiciary is the baby of the three arms, and the executive is contesting the judiciary's efforts to protect the constitution. There are those who ask the question: have we over judicialized our politics? Are we as Kenyans too quick, perhaps, to resort to the judiciary to resolve problems which should be resolved politically? Are we setting up our judiciary, as it were, the youngest of our three arms, by continually presenting them with these large political issues, which in ideal circumstances should be resolved, amongst politicians in parliament, etc., etc. But because when you look at the BBI proposals, they were political. They were meant to aim at meeting, very specific political objectives for the elite. What are the implications of that kind of situation where there's a continuous, we keep, all our hottest political potatoes are thrown into this youngest of our three arms of government, which does an excellent job, but I often feel that if our judiciary is a Mercedes-Benz, and if this BBI ruling was a Maserati, our political system is a Probox, and there's a level of dissonance there.
It's a bit challenging for me to answer this question. And I'm going to begin by dealing with an aspect to it that that actually you didn't ask.
Okay.
Before I come to what you asked.
Okay.
So the aspect of it that you didn't ask and that concerned me about BBI.
Yeah.
Right from the onset, I was of the opinion that BBI was trying to deal. I think we suffer more from a problem of seeking legal solutions to political problems.
Okay.
Period.
Yeah.
Not just judicializing them.
Yes.
But we seem to think that when we have a political problem, it's a legal problem, and it's not. So BBI, in my opinion, is an attempt to deal legally with something that's actually not a legal problem.
Okay.
And in the process, we are running the risk of ruining a proper legal framework that we worked on very hard as a country to set up. So until 2010, our political problem was also a legal problem.
Yes.
Because we had a legal framework that did not facilitate democracy.
Yes.
The president could do all sorts of things.
Correct.
Yeah. By law.
Correct.
we changed that. We were excluded by law. Huge swathes of this country's population were excluded by law from the public space, the public domain, from decision making. Women couldn't inherit, land, which then led to certain socioeconomic conditions, etc. Young people were left out, and it was okay to discriminate against people on the basis of their age. It was okay to discriminate against people on the basis of their on the basis of whether or not they had a disability. Legally, you could do it. Yeah. Today you can't. So we had a legal problem that that of course intermeshed with a political problem. Our problem today, as far as I'm concerned, is purely political. It is not a, there's very little wrong with the Constitution in relation to politics.
Yes.
I think the Constitution has set up, a fairly egalitarian political framework. There's a couple of things there that, that could do with strengthening mainly around integrity, mainly around gender equality.
Yes.
But, by and large, it's egalitarian. On the other hand, we have a political elite that evolved in a highly despotic political culture, is used to that highly despotic political culture, and I think will continuously seek, until they have been tamed by the Kenyan people, they will continually seek to reassert despotism. Historically, the Kenyan people had various ways in which they challenged despotism. Aside from the liberation struggles, which we know about, both the violent expressions and non-violent expressions of it.
Yes.
We know, like, for example, when we came into independence, we had a very active labor movement.
Correct.
One of the sites of contestation was the trade unions. Upon independence, what happened? Our first head of state moved very quickly to control the trade unions.
Correct.
I'm going to fast forward.
Yes.
So in the 1990s, we had evolved quite a robust political opposition. There's been a lot of work that has gone into taming that opposition.
Yes.
And so I think we're living in an environment where the people have been forced into a position where the only space where they can express themselves is in the judiciary. Yeah. So we're not the ones who judicialized politics, yes, but we've been pushed into that space. In as much as the Constitution provides that the judiciary will be the guardian of the Constitution, I must say I did not expect this level of contestation.
Okay.
In that front.
Mm-hmm.
I had rather naively, hindsight is 2020. Yeah. I had rather naively thought that given our history,
yes,
there were some things we would not forget so fast.
Yes.
And we would not allow so easily. The aggressive assault that we've witnessed on those freedoms,
yes,
within the last 10 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
From where you sat as a member of the committee of experts at Atsango, and given now this experience, as you've just said, hindsight is 2020, and we we all have learned lessons. What in hindsight would you have sought as a committee of experts, or you as a member of the committee of experts, to do differently in terms of our current constitution, given the lessons that we have learned since 2010? Now, 11 years now, going on 11 years this year. What would you change?
So one of the things that happened when we were working on the Constitution was we kept being told that it was too detailed.
Yes.
And there are some details that got thrown out of the Constitution of Kenya 2010 that existed in its predecessors, because it's the product of 3 different documents.
Yes.
Yeah, that I think maybe should have been held on to.
For example?
For example, if you look at because the Constitution was a product of citizen-led initiatives, there were a lot more protections for civil society that were explicit.
Okay.
That I would have left in. And then there are things which were just not there because I think we did not anticipate at all the problems. And I don't know how this could be done, but I think the provisions on leadership and integrity needed to be more robust, and not rely so much on ethics. I think they should have been express criminal sanctions for violations embedded in the Constitution. It's interesting that we went to great lengths to criminalize abortion.
Correct.
And that's the only crime that's constitutionalized.
Correct. Yes. Yes.
But we don't criminalize like murder.
Yes.
Of those of us who are here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct.
I think the Constitution needed to expressly say that if you have been implicated in perpetrating certain types of criminal activity,
yes,
you just are not allowed to hold public office of any kind. Yeah. Period.
I mean, it's led to a debate now. Whether partly we are paying the price for the mangling of Chapter 6 on leadership and integrity of the Constitution, that we find ourselves in the space that we are in, partly because we allowed for that section to be watered down by the political elite.
And we continuously elect people. I think the citizens of Kenya have to take responsibility.
Yeah.
You see it in whenever you have somebody who's accused of some form of crime,
yes,
and they're a public figure, you always see in the newspapers that allow comments, you always see people saying things like, oh, this one should run for, this one should run to be an MP or to be a governor, or, we even joke about the fact that somehow for us, when people show themselves in that kind of a way, those are the kind of people that we consider to be, I always say it's a pity Jeffrey Dahmer didn't live in Kenya.
Oh dear.
He'd probably be president. I mean, those are the kind of values that, despite what we state for values or principles,
yes.
It seems that our actions, there's a tension between who we choose to represent us, and therefore entrust the protection of the state and the Constitution with, versus what the principles say we want. And so so for me again, yes, I would look at how do we create a political culture of integrity? What needs to be put in place to create reinforce integrity? And then also I would probably put more into the organs and institutions that protect the Constitution. For example, the Constitution Implementation Commission was a temporary commission.
Correct.
Yeah. Hindsight is 2020. Today, if I was working on the Constitution, that body would have been constitutionalized for at least 20 years.
Yeah.
With no way for the political elite to determine the removal of that body. I don't, so I don't know, and those are just some of the things. But we also must understand that constitution making is both a political and a legal process.
Correct.
Yeah, and I don't know that those who tend to understand the legal dynamics necessarily have the ability to understand and negotiate the political space.
In fact, that's what I wanted to, our time always flies so quickly. That's what I wanted to end on, with just a bit of your reflections, because you mentioned it at the start of this conversation, Atsango, that we're living in a world where we're in a democratic recession, where we're seeing constitutional reversals in a wide range of countries, including, we've seen challenges in the US, for example, where, a head of state was voted out and has refused to accept the results, and they still contest around that. And it has had political implications, and then a whole range of other countries, from Brazil, et cetera, et cetera. And I just wanted to get your reflections on, how this then plays out now, because clearly, the BVI judgment recently was simply the start. I often, I always have to keep on reminding myself that the BBI judgment will have a political response in the same way that the Maraga judgment on the 1st of September 2017 that annulled the election had, in a sense, created the BBI. Part of the political response was the BBI, and so there shall be a political response to this particular judgment. And I just wanted to get your reflections on, given our trajectory so far, what that may look like. I know I'm asking you to look into a sort of crystal ball there.
For me, I have to say I'm very proud of those judges. I think they would have had to have been remarkably naive if they didn't think, especially given the history of the 2017 decision and how things played out.
Yes.
Only very naive individuals would not have known that the likelihood that they were going to say what they were going to say would result in the kind of repercussions that appear to be playing out. In the sense of, we've seen as part of the political response an attempt to cow the judiciary, orchestrated groups of people coming to object. And I must say, one of the things that I think is very observable when you compare it to previous instances where the public has genuinely been offended by decisions of either the judiciary or various arms of the political elite. When it is spontaneous, you have large groups of people. Nobody needs to tell them to go out.
Yes.
I have been struck by how few those who have been persuaded to go out and object.
Yes. To this particular judgment. Yes. Yes.
I've been struck by how few they are.
Yes.
Because I suspect I'm sorry, I say this with the greatest respect, but one suspects, given this country's history, one normally receives incentives.
Yes. Yes.
And so given how few they are,
yes,
I would suspect that, the ability to provide fairly decent incentive should have been available.
Yes.
And therefore one would have expected, if indeed this was really as offensive to the citizens as such,
yes,
one would have expected, a more robust expression of disdain and disgust. So,
yes, it hasn't really built up that way, has it?
It's been quite affirming.
Yes.
I think it's good for the Kenyan citizen to know that no Kenyan citizen, no Kenyan,
yes,
regardless of who they are,
yes,
can get away with destroying the Constitution.
Yeah.
And that there is somebody somewhere,
yes,
whose job it is and who is willing to say to any Kenyan, it doesn't matter who they are, we
yes,
think what you're doing
yes,
isn't good for us, and you need to go back and have a rethink about what you're doing.
yes,
I think the general lesson of that
yes,
is, is to me far more important, and cannot, I think that just can't be gainsaid.
No.
So in that way, I think it's been good for us. I think the politicians are used to having their way on anything and everything.
Yes.
They tend to be petulant. And given that they control several instruments of the state, including the power of force, which the judges were reminded of, yes, in various ways. Yeah. I think they, quite unsurprisingly, move with great speed to express that. But I think as citizens, we must keep sending the message that, at the end of the day, is what you're doing something that will allow Kenya to move forward in a way that is in all of us' interests? Or is it something that may be actually very destructive for us? And in a mature democratic system, one expects that when those who a court has made decisions against receive those decisions, that the correct and appropriate way to challenge that is to go into court.
Yeah. Mm.
It is not to issue threats. It is not to engage in the kind of innuendo, yes, that we witnessed happening. So those are signs of an evolving democracy to me. Yes. And I think what we have to do is keep sending the message that no matter how unpleasant a decision may be, yes, to politicians, they must respect the law that we've agreed to be governed by.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and whatever way in which they challenge those decisions must be a way that reinforces and grows our democracy. Not in, and so that to me is the most important thing. For me, it's not as much about whether or not we agree with BBI. The point is that the Constitution lays down very clear principles about how it is if one wants to prosecute any public agenda, yes, any decision-making agenda, any policy agenda. There are very clear rules about how we do that. And one of those rules includes the fact that we must have an opportunity to participate, all of us, in that process.
Read, on that positive note, Atsango, I'd like to thank you very much for your time. I get the sense that this is still a developing matter. The government has appealed the decision of the High Court. We can see political realignments already underway. So I would ask your permission to be able to come back to you for more wisdom around these issues in the coming weeks. But for this evening, to say asante sana once again for your time.
Thank you, John. And I'll be more than happy to have another conversation.
Thank you.